Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for being here today. We hope that this conversation will spark ideas for all of us about how we can better develop the ways to collaborate across the university on humanities research. And I just want to let you know that we are recording this webinar and we will eventually have it posted on our website. So I have a few introductions to do first. I'm Jennifer Borland. I am a professor in the Department of Art, Graphic Design, and Art History. I teach art history, and I'm also the director of the Humanities Initiative. And then I also have a co-director this year, the wonderful Sarah Milligan, who is the director of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Project at the library at OSU. Sarah, do you want to say anything else about your role?
No, I'm really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be working with you. So.
Excellent, thank you. And so we have a wonderful guest to introduce you to today, but I wanted to just give you a quick heads up on a couple of events that we have coming up. The first is we are one of many groups on campus co-sponsoring an event hosted by the OSU Library. Dr. Sophia Unoble, who is the author of the book Algorithms of Oppression, will be speaking on November 4th. That's just next week at 4 o'clock. And you can find that registration form. I think the link is right there that Sarah posted, but you can also find it if you go to the library's website. And the second event that I wanted to mention that we'll be doing before the end of the semester is a kind of brainstorming forum for getting feedback from the campus community on the proposed research cluster program that we will be initiating for next year. So that will be on Tuesday, November 16, and registration for that will be circulating soon. So I will be sending that out. If you attended today, you'll get added to our email list and we'll make sure that you have access to that information. But you always can find information on our events at the website humanities.okstate.edu as well. Just a couple of other quick things. I just want to say thanks to the College of Arts and Sciences for facilitating the support of the Humanities Initiative. And I also wanted to invite those of you who are here today to send us all of your information about different events that you might want us to help promote. We are hoping that that will eventually be a kind of key part of what the Humanities Initiative can offer. And so if you want to send an email to humanities@okstate.edu, and let us know that you want us to share that with the network that we have and put it on our website, we can certainly do that. So if you have a flyer for an event coming up that's humanities related, please don't hesitate to send those things to us. Okay, and with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Jennie Burroughs is the Interim Associate University Librarian for Research and Learning at the University of Minnesota. She was previously the Director for Arts and Humanities at the University of Minnesota, and then before that, the Government Information Librarian at the University of Montana in Missoula. The Research and Learning Division at the University of Minnesota offers critical support of campus research, teaching, and learning. The work of the division includes engagement with campus programs, collection development, on-demand help services, research services, critical inquiry, instruction, and other support services focused on teaching and learning. Her work focuses on teaching and research services provided by liaison librarians, library learning services, libraries-wide space planning and digital scholarship services, as well as equity and inclusion and a number of other areas. Jennie led the inception of the Digital Arts, Sciences, and Humanities program, the acronym of DASH, and has published and presented on digital scholarship services and research libraries. And her current research is focused on multidisciplinary research collaboration and humanities research collaboration behaviors. And this is what she's going to be mostly focused on telling us about today. And she published in 2017 an essay called No Uniform Culture, Patterns of Collaborative Research in the Humanities. And that, again, is linked in the chat And it's an essay that uses campus scholarly networking and an expertise system to examine trends in co-authorship in order to measure the prevalence of deep collaboration and readiness for team research. And so that's really the kind of the crux, I think, of our conversation today, is thinking about how we can facilitate and set up systems in which better collaboration across the humanities can happen. And one of the reasons, again, that this is relevant to the Humanities Initiative on the whole is because we're in the process of developing these kinds of projects. And for those of you who might be interested, we will be accepting applications for that program in the spring to be participating in the fall of next year. So more information will be coming on that. So Jennie is going to start by giving us a brief introduction to the research on this topic. And then most of the time that we spend today will be kind of in the form of an interview. We have questions for her, and there will also be ample time at the end for your questions. So I would encourage you to make note of those questions, and then you can put them either in the Q&A or the chat when we get to that point a little bit later in our hour. So Jennie, thank you so much for being here today. And I'm going to turn it over to you for the next few minutes.
That's great. Thank you all so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to look for the thumbs up that it's actually working as it's supposed to. Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. Again, thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here and to talk with you all about this. I thought what I would do is start with just a little bit of framing, basically, for our conversation today. Oops, and I went too far already. So what I thought I would do is tell you a little bit about the No Uniform Culture article that I wrote, and also just share a few things that I've been reading in the team research or team science literature that I think really have a bearing on humanities collaboration as well. And then we would go back to our conversation with Jennifer and Sarah. So to start, I want to set a little bit of context that when I started doing some research on humanities collaboration and thought about using a bibliometric analysis of co-authorship, it was in the context at the University of Minnesota of a number of grand challenges initiatives and the process of setting up a digital humanities related initiative at the university. And grand challenges, I think they use that term or have used that term in a number of different schools. It's that whole idea of bringing together larger teams of researchers from multiple disciplines to really tackle the thorny societal problems of the day, to think about how we might come up to some shared solutions, nuanced solutions that really look at those challenges from multiple angles. And in part of that, I was thinking a lot about hoping that humanists would also find themselves welcome in those projects, ready to collaborate on those projects, and also thinking about some of the trope of the solo scholar in the humanities and wondering how that might go. But it really prompted me to then ask myself, is that true? You know, there had been so much interest in digital humanities on our campus, people who were trying to figure out how to kind of get going on these collaborative or larger projects, and to really bridge beyond their traditional disciplines. And I wanted to do a little bit more research to see if kind of that image of the solo scholar really held true, or what the current state was. In doing some of that research, I was really struck by this essay or lecture given by C.P. Snow in 1959 called The Two Cultures. And he talks about this sense of this real divide between the sciences and the arts, and how he was seeing a lack of communication and collaboration across these two cultures, and that was a really artificial divide and a real detriment to our society. So, and he really called on the value that comes from bridging between those two cultures, and it really resonates with me. I think that there's a lot of phenomenal research that comes from looking at questions from multiple different angles, basically. So talking briefly about my research project, what I decided to do was use the publication data that was in the Experts at Minnesota system. This is a system that is based on Pure, which is an Elsevier product, and draws citation information from Scopus. And I would say that we also did a lot of work to import data from CVs from the College of Liberal Arts to augment more of the arts and humanities research outputs that are not as well represented in Scopus. So I thought I could use that data set essentially to look at patterns of co-authorship. I will say I use co-authorship as a proxy for collaboration. That's not the sum total of collaboration in any way, but it was one that was very specific, countable. I also thought with writing being such the core output of arts and humanities, that anytime people are co-authoring together and taking the time to write together, that is probably a good indication of a substantial collaboration. So that's kind of the jump that I made, knowing that it's not a perfect proxy. I also looked specifically at 4 different departments as a starting point. So I looked at English, history, writing studies, and gender, women, and sexuality studies. And I chose those 4 departments because they were fairly distinct, but also they were departments that were particularly interested and vocal about getting involved in digital humanities work. So I thought that they might be, that might demonstrate different levels of collaboration readiness or co-authorship already present in their research outputs. So in looking at that, what I found were a number of different things I thought was quite interesting. So I found that humanities collaboration is increasing over time. So when I looked at patterns of co-authorship from the 1950s, 60s into the early 70s, as compared with co-authorship in the 90s, 2000s, et cetera, I found that really co-authorship was steadily and dramatically increasing over time across all the different departments. The other thing, though, that really struck me was that the level of co-authorship varies significantly by department. So this is where the no uniform culture comes from. There is no uniform humanities culture. It really varies based on those disciplines, those departmental trends. So for instance, with English, the English department, very low levels of co-authorship. I believe that's remained true actually over time. I think you're talking about under 10% in terms of co-authorship, as compared with writing studies where co-authorship was happening about 50% of the time or over 50% of the time. So significant differences there. It does raise questions then of why is that? What is it about the culture of those disciplines, those departments that really support collaboration? And I think that's another area to kind of look at. Knowing that recognition was a big part, I think, in collaboration and making it possible to collaborate, safe to collaborate, something that helps you on the promotion and tenure track is a big part of it, and also just disciplinary norms. I also wanted to look at the question of whether there was more co-authorship early in one's career or late in one's career, and I could come up with a thesis statement for either of those. Either it could be folks who are new into academia, younger professors, for instance, would they come into higher education more inclined to collaborate, as being used to that being the norm, for instance? Conversely, would it be safer in some ways, or something that was people felt free to do more experimentation and collaboration after promotion and tenure and later on in one's career? So that's where I looked at the comparison of collaboration or co-authorship in the first 5 publications for an author and the last 5 publications for an author. And what I found was a significant, a statistically significant higher level of collaboration or co-authorship, I should say, for the later career stage. Again, this raises questions for me. Is that because there's more time, there's more freedom to co-author and to experiment post tenure? Is it because when you're later on in your career, you have a broader network, you have more people that you know that you would like to collaborate with? That's also very, very likely, frankly. So as with all of these things, it raises more questions to kind of ask more questions. I also found briefly that it was much more common for co-authorship to be present for larger projects like books as compared with articles. So that makes me think about the value of collaboration for larger projects, for instance. So there's just a couple more things. One of the big questions this raised for me is like, why do you collaborate on research? When does an author choose to collaborate on research? How do they choose their co-authors? This is additional research that I would like to do to kind of answer those questions. But what I'm seeing in the literature, both from team science as well as from scholars on humanities collaboration, is that people typically pursue a deep and substantial collaboration when they want to pursue more complex questions, novel outputs, and they find that very generative to kind of have those different perspectives coming together. I will note from my article that, the limits are that it's one university. It's just 4 departments, so it's not probably representative of all of the humanities. But for me, it was kind of enough to say, okay, there's more work to be done here. It would be beneficial to look at things department by department and to look at those individual cultures, because it's not this monolith, basically. Last slide, and then we'll go back to the conversation. I thought I would share a few things that I've been seeing in the science of team science literature that I think is also valuable to think about as we're forming and supporting and fostering collaboration in the humanities. I am struck in the literature by how much they talk about the value of taking the time to start well, taking the time to talk through the problem space, talk through and set shared goals. Also taking time to talk through your different methodologies. Talk about the vocabulary that you use to kind of create that shared understanding of language of what you mean when you talk about a particular methodology and how that might be a bit different in another discipline. Similarly, there's also a lot of recommendations coming from both digital humanities as well as team science about taking the time to discuss roles, responsibilities, credit, publishing venues, or what kinds of outputs you want to produce early on in the collaboration. That saves a lot of time and churn later on, essentially, to be upfront about that. I found it interesting that the National Institutes on Health Ombudsman's Office has a collaborators prenup, which is an interesting way to kind of frame it. And really what it is a set of questions that you want to ask of your team around those things like, how will we co-author? How will we share credit? They obviously include things like, and will we share reagents from our lab, which is not so applicable for the humanities, but a lot of the other questions are also quite applicable for any kind of collaborative research. And I think you could also see examples of project charters sometimes that also help to set the stage and shared understanding. And I'll close with just saying that paying attention to those institutional incentives is always helpful too. In setting up and continuing to grow the DASH program at Minnesota, we do continue to hear that having the time, having the funding to pursue these projects is really key, as you might expect. Thinking about what kind of recognition comes from collaboration is important. I do know, for instance, the Provost office here at Minnesota has launched in the past few years a different or additional review board for community engaged scholarship to help provide a way to evaluate community engaged scholarship for the promotion tenure process. So it might be worth kind of looking at how are you evaluating collaborative research? Are there additional ways to talk about the value that brings to the institution as part of a way of breaking down potential P&T barriers? So I'll stop there actually and stop sharing my screen. And just want to say thanks again for having me, and to Jennifer and Sarah.
Thank you. That was excellent. That's connecting so many of I think the things that we would like to talk more about, more of the questions that we have, and kind of how they all come together to kind of think about where we can take all of these ideas. So thank you very much for that. And again, just a reminder, in the chat, you can see a link to that article that this grew out of. But I can tell that there's already, it's been a few years since that came out, and you've already, I think, kind of moved past some of the observations from that essay, even just in your presentation, in terms of thinking about how to take the learning that you achieved from that process and taking it forward. So I'm going to start with a really basic question, but I think it's maybe one that I don't want us to make too many assumptions from the get-go. And we were wondering if you could tell us how you would define collaborative research. I know for the purposes of your essay, you use co-authorship as a kind of proxy, but obviously that's not kind of the only way to think about it. But I guess when you're talking about collaborative research, what kinds of parameters are you putting on that? How are you describing that?
Yeah, and I will say, I also notice I tend to have that assumption that I think about kind of the cross-disciplinary collaboration as well, which is not, again, the sum total of collaboration. There's many other within a discipline or within a department collaboration that you would see as well. I tend to think about collaboration and collaborative projects being ones that where there's kind of an equal or mutually beneficial kind of working relationship that all parties in the project are getting something out of those research questions, find value in those research questions. And so it's collaborative research is often where that again, the problem space, the questions are kind of co-defined, where each partner or each party get something out of the research. Like what I found really interesting sometimes from seeing partnerships and collaborations across it more further afield disciplines sometimes is, and I'll give you an example. So one of the faculty members in writing studies has a longstanding collaboration with somebody in computer science around kind of 3D modeling of ancient rhetorical spaces. And this is just fascinating to me. It's like, how did you even get to talking about this in some ways? And what really struck me was that for the writing studies faculty member, found a new way to think about those ancient Greek sites and experienced them in a different way. For the computer scientist, it was a new kind of humanities challenge about how do you represent in a 3D model these different historical sites and think about how you bring in how the audio would go through the space and bring in other factors. And so for each of them, they were doing something different and new in their disciplines. But what was nice about that is that they had kind of worked together on how to describe what will come out of that research project. So it's kind of that mutually beneficial research process.
Yeah, thank you. And I was also thinking about your point about what kind of is achieved in your presentation in terms of also having a kind of maybe a goal that goes beyond what one individual person would be able to accomplish, either just kind of logistically, or that even kind of the project itself is a different one if you're doing it as a solo author versus something bigger. And I think that segues really nicely into the next question. Sarah, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, and I think this is what, reading your article, I think this is one of the things that I pulled out, and this is also what I think most humanists sort of struggle with. What are the real benefits of working collaboratively in humanities, right? So I like, you sort of breaking down that it's not always like across fields, right, or across departments, but I think often we kind of feel like it's just too much work to start that collaborative process, right? So being really intentional to think about why is it important to foster collaborative research? What are the benefits and what does it offer that like traditional independent or single authored research doesn't? What's the case for it?
What's the case for it? Yeah, this is also an area of interest of mine because we know it takes more time. If you're going to work together, it takes longer, and time is precious in some ways, and it's hard to find that time. But I think it's a number of things that come up a lot in the literature. And I think what we probably have all seen too is that you get, look at things from different angles, different perspectives. It's a way to bring in different skill sets and resources. That's, I think, especially around like digital humanities, it's been great that no one person can probably have all the skills you need too often to do some really great projects. And so what you might want to bring in are complementary skill sets to kind of do something different, basically. I think as well, I see a lot of overlap as well with, community engaged research too, that takes a long time to kind of build those relationships, build that trust. And yet what comes out of it is extremely rich, and that there seems to be more opportunity for I don't know, they talk about the kind of the magic of collaboration, just different insights that you wouldn't get on your own. I will say there's also other bibliometric analyses that talk about that there is higher citation counts from collaborative or co-authored research. So there's a little bit that helps as well. So there may be broader reach, both because of the co-authorship and maybe in where you publish, for instance. It might open you up to different types of research outputs, for instance, that might not be common in your field, that you might think about how do we make this accessible through some of our traditional research venues, but also in more publicly engaged ways. Or do you think about not just a textual output, but also a documentary, a website, visualizations, things of that nature. So that kind of might open up more options. And especially, I think for larger projects, makes it feel more manageable to have also more people that are engaged in that work.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to make a quick self-reference and just say that for the few projects that I've done that were co-authored, I also just found the whole process of writing more rewarding. And I don't know that that's always how things work in collaborative projects, but I think there's something really just like intellectually fulfilling about working through a collaborative project where you're talking through with other people the different phases of the process. And like you said, that takes longer. But I also think like it's a very different process than kind of sitting in your office in front of the computer with some books to the side that, doing your thing kind of all in your head. It really, it can force each participant to have to articulate their ideas more overtly, bouncing ideas back and forth between each other. Like, I think that all of those things which aren't super tangible are hard to identify until someone has kind of experienced that. But I have found that to be a really key piece of it too. So it can be less about the final result and more just about like kind of the fulfilling nature of the process itself when you're working with other people like that. And I think if you've only done really kind of independent research, you may not even have a sense that that's a different kind of character to collaborative research.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It can draw out different insights for you from having that dialogue. I think it helps you then kind of raises up points to clarify along the way, where you may think, certainly done that's perfectly clear. What do you mean? What do I mean there? But just it helps you think about how to translate the things in your head essentially to another audience as you're going along. And it's just, yeah, it's very fulfilling. I agree.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to our next question, which has to do with how to facilitate this on a campus. So whether we're talking about specifically the role of a library or other kind of research entities on a campus or the campus as a whole. In our case, this sort of structure of the initiative is partly to facilitate this. So what are some of the ways that we can foster it? And I think you've touched on some of them in your presentation already, but if you have kind of thoughts on more specific suggestions or advice that campuses like ours can make use of to try to move into a place where the sort of collaboration is not just welcomed, but supported, right?
Right. A number of things come to mind there. And I think about what has seemed to support that on my campus, which is still also, trying to continually increase, I think, more collaboration on campus, including collaborations that involve the humanities. It's not like we've solved it in any way, but that idea of creating those spaces for getting to know one another sounds so basic in some ways, but creating that space to also just share different ideas from one another, with one another, is really beneficial, and that can then spark those collaborations. If something resonates with somebody else, say, I have a parallel question or a related question to that, that's, I think, oftentimes how those collaborations start, I've also heard many stories about people saying, yeah, this was over going out for coffee together, and we're just talking about something, and that sparked this research idea together. In conference times, it was, hey, we were at the bar talking about this and had just this conversation. And so it's that kind of social time that really kind of can help to foster that. In addition, I think about things that the library helped to facilitate here with the Grand Challenges project, where we have been doing for a number of years this idea called research sprints that started at University of Kansas, actually. And the idea there was to have faculty members apply for this week-long sprint, kind of a prototyping time with a team of librarians. And you would talk through the research project, find your research materials, do some prototyping, data management, things like that. And it was quite successful even in the first round. And then the provost office said, could you do that maybe for our Grand Challenges teams as well? So we did a round of research sprints for these Grand Challenges teams, working with those team of faculty members to talk through the nature of their project, what resources they might need, helping them to set up some workflows, shared research material space, and just to kind of kickstart the project. So again, taking some of that time to bring everybody together at one time and to kind of hash out some of the parameters of the project. And that really helped to get some things going too. I find that's a really common role for libraries. We talk to everybody. So as we were kind of early phases of the digital humanities work on campus, I found oftentimes faculty members asking, well, what's happening in that other department? They were feeling like they knew what was going on maybe in their department, but didn't have a great sense of what was happening in other, not that far off departments elsewhere within the College of Liberal Arts, for instance. And in the libraries, we probably have more of a sense of what projects are going on here and there. Maybe we've heard about somebody who's doing a similar kind of project and can be matchmakers then sometimes. We try to also use the Experts of Minnesota system to do some of that as well. But that kind of connector role and convener role can be really powerful, I think, as well, to kind of, again, just getting people started talking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I mean, it seems like there's like so many different tools that we all have, and that maybe the best approach is to use many of them, right? So to focus on finding, spaces, whether that's physical or more kind of, mental space to dedicate to these things, the matchmaking part, the helping these projects get kind of kickstarted. I think those are all things that that our librarians are definitely doing, and that we as an initiative hope to also contribute to. So yeah, I think there's some fantastic ideas there. I'm going to ask a couple more questions before we open it up to our broader audience. I think that it's clear that there are also challenges that have already been discussed. Sorry, Sarah, I'm totally jumping in and doing the question. Okay, I'm just going to keep forward. Sort of there's challenges that are in play with just kind of the structure of institutions and issues like RPT and reappointment and promotion and tenure processes at different schools. But I'm also wondering, so you could certainly talk a little bit more about those and what we might do to kind of alleviate some of those challenges, but also if there's things to avoid, or there's sort of pitfalls to this process as well, or other things that just simply don't work. If you have any thoughts about any of those kinds of issues as well.
Some thoughts, at least, both kind of things I've read about, but also things that I've seen. I am struck by how often that notion of the promotion and tenure and what will be rewarded comes up again and again. And most recently, I think about when we did some strategic planning just a couple of years ago to kind of plan the next phase of DASH. how much it came up from different folks, including from the deans that we interviewed that kind of said, we're not sure how you actually effectively evaluate digital scholarship. And I think that comes true for collaborative research too. How do you do that exactly? Which is why I'm struck by the provost office trying something around community engaged scholarship and wondering if something similar around how you having, and I should clarify with the community engaged scholarship kind of review process, it brings together scholars from different disciplines who are real leaders and experts in community engaged scholarship. So they have that knowledge to help evaluate. So would you have maybe folks who are common research collaborators, co-authors, what have you, help to evaluate, is this a great collaborative project? Is this a great digital project? To really kind of give some assurance that this is a high quality research output, for instance. I think that the time thing is a big one too. People finding the time to do this well and to stay focused on it, I think is something that comes up an awful lot. Figuring out and finding that dedicated time is a real barrier. And I think the challenge is that these projects do take quite a long time too. So how do you sustain that focus, for instance, or keep that project going past a semester or shorter time period? And I don't know that I have a great solution to that yet. I think that's a common barrier too, I think that also relates in sometimes to the promotion and tenure cycle too. That could be another barrier for newer scholars who are on the clock, and need to produce in order to be successful in the promotion and tenure cycle. So that's a tricky thing. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I think there's other things to look at within, for us within departments and disciplines. Are there any kind of barriers within the department or the discipline itself that's just not, that doesn't value or see as much value, I should say, in collaborative research? That's not their primary output, and that's something to kind of look at. It's something that I've seen. I think it's a big factor in what kind of research is valued or not through the review process. It's tricky. I don't know that there's a ton of things that I've seen that just have not worked necessarily. I do think when we were doing some early support for the grant challenges, we had some kind of social events and things like that for the new teams, and they were okay, but I think the teams kind of already were starting to get to know one another, and that actually the focus time to work together was found to be the more important thing, the more important investment, so to speak. But I can't say that there are other barriers that have really come up that have seemed to be consistent ones that I've seen.
Thank you. Yeah, I think these are all key things to think about, and kind of working on things from all these different sort of levels, right? So talking on the kind of disciplinary or departmental level, and then also thinking what kind of larger structures are in place that are either helping or hindering the opportunities for this kind of work. So thank you. Sarah, do you want to ask one more question from our list before we sort of open things up? Is there one that you're especially keen to get Jennie's thoughts on?
Yeah, I do have one question, and also just another prompt that to the audience, that you can put your questions in chat, and Jennifer and I will help moderate that, or in the Q&A, either one. We'll be watching both of those. But when I was reading your 2017 article, one of the things that I sort of picked up on was the sort of underlying reference that the STEM fields have had this, sort of like disciplinary field shift towards collaborative project, right? And part of that is funders and supporters, and like it was an outside pressure that happened that really sort of pushed to change a lot of the sort of STEM related projects to be more collaborative. And it made me think, like, what lessons can we take from that process happening and carry forward to us when we're thinking about trying to make collaborative spaces more appealing to humanities areas as well?
Good question. I do think that was really yeah, a massive push in STEM in terms of requirements with forming grants is to really emphasize partnerships in terms of application for grants. And I'm trying to think if that has also become the case for NEH grants. I think it probably depends on the NEH grant in terms of acquiring, whether or not you need to have collaborations across institutions or even within the institution. Yeah, there is something there in terms of providing funding for even from the university in terms of internal grants towards collaborative projects are powerful. Getting those kinds of resources that can kind of help provide an RA for your project is a big help, course release time, things like that to kind of make that focused time. So I think there are some options there that again make it more appealing to pursue. I think there's something there again about the recognition piece. If you were awarded this grant and as a real I don't know, is a real, not cool exactly I'm trying to say, but just that there's recognition from getting one of those grants and that this named project that you're pursuing, has a real value to your work. Yeah, I'm not quite sure, but I do think, it's been huge. I think about as well for, the requirement for data management plans within federal grants was something that really moved more researchers to be thinking about how am I prepping my data or research materials and how will I preserve them after a project. That is the thing that really got everybody thinking about data management in a sense, because you had to, forthcoming, within the STEM fields is the requirement from the NIH to publicly share data. That's a big shift that we're kind of trying to prepare for, because that's going to be something that researchers need as well. So that is, always a big motivator. So that could be part of the requirements for the projects or for the internal grants too. What are the outcomes that you want to see? What do you want to value? And putting the funding behind that is really key.
I also think something that you talked about in your initial presentation about these sort of like early project planning partnership agreements, and that there's templates out there, which I think is super helpful. I'm curious if you have examples of like where we could find that, or how people might be able to get their eyes on some of that. Because I think just being able to think forward, like, what are all the things that I need to check off, a conversation of what do I need to make this count towards my professional growth, right? Because a lot of departments, maybe grants don't actually mean anything. Like you don't get recognition for grant awards through a lot of humanities areas for tenure and promotion. And so maybe that's not your incentive, but I think, having something that basically walks you through the process to talk about, where to spend your energy is good.
Helps kind of keep people on track. I was thinking when we were talking about barriers, and I don't know why it didn't occur to me at the time, but I think about one of the barriers that comes up that I would say maybe it's for that library sense is having a clear scope and set of boundaries for a project, or not having clear scoping is the downfall for a lot of projects, I would say. The differing levels of expectations of what's possible in a given time period, or the level of difficulty it takes to create a project. That's actually the downfall that comes up most often. And in that sense, having those early conversations about what are we going to be able to do? What are we going to be able to do in the next 6 months, for instance? What help can we actually provide? And setting some boundaries on that can feel limiting sometimes, but it also can just be setting clear expectations for all concerned. So I have seen some kind of project scoping examples from, I've seen some, I think, from NYU. Stan Rucker writes about that kind of thing. There is a team science toolkit out there as well that has, again, some of those questions that you can kind of work through as you're initiating those projects. But what I can do is I can also go back and find some examples and share that with you all too. Yeah, it's one of those things that the more you can kind of be clear about, we will be able to do this much, and then let's talk again, is a good way to not say, and that's the end. It might be that's when the next conversation is. Because I have seen more times just that mismatch of expectations for projects that continue on into perpetuity when one party said, but I thought we were done with that actually. So using some of that, some of those project documents can be very helpful for kind of laying that out and then saying, okay, and this may be then a next phase that we plan, you know, as much as it's also nice to talk about like blue sky, where do we want to be? What do we want to head for? And then to think about, well, what's phase one? So.
That's great, thank you. I know that Megan Mackin raised her hand, so I think we'll start with your questions. And Megan, did you want to go ahead? I don't know if you just have to use the Q&A or chat, or just a chat. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have some questions in the Q&A too. So.
Oh. Okay, Megan, we'll come back to you if you want to put your comment somewhere. Why don't we hit one of the other questions? Puya Jahan Shahi asks us, from collaborations you've researched, do they start more often through the unplanned event or as a pre-planned collaborative project? So unplanned event being like the meeting over coffee or something like that. So do you have kind of thoughts on which of those paths tend to be the more frequently productive, I don't know, seed moment for a collaborative project?
I've seen both. I think for really long-standing collaborations, I think it tends to start off, sometimes it's those unplanned coffee chats, the, meeting at a faculty social kind of thing and talking about it, because it's also been on those folks' time scale, essentially. But what has also been valuable is having, for some of those pre-planned collaboration events, having kind of those broad areas of interest, and then people saying, well, that does tie into an area of research or research interest of mine. So that's a nice way to kind of bring together people on a broad topic together. So I've seen success from both in some ways. I think sometimes what persists in terms of collaborations are when you find somebody that you just work well together. You appreciate each other's perspectives, the resource and skill balance, for instance. So sometimes the pre-planned collaborative project can then lead to those longer term collaborations, especially when there's just been a nice bit of synchronicity there together.
Sorry, I'm going to jump ahead to Megan because she did have her hand up earlier. And then we've got some great other questions here. So Megan's wondering how or if you use research information management systems to connect potential collaborators or to document collaborations beyond publications. So something like labeling or grouping output into a project.
It's a good question. Yeah, we have been starting to do more of that. On a couple of different levels. What we've tried to do sometimes is add kind of labels or tags within our expertise management system around things like, gosh, what was it? Achievement gap was the first one that comes to mind, that we tried to tag researchers that were all doing work related to the achievement gap in multiple different disciplines to help them find one another. We've also done some nice things recently around a water collaboration network. So people who are researching water in one shape or form, everything from folks in extension and in the applied sciences to people that are thinking about water public policy and things like that. So we have created, using the research information systems, using that as a platform to bring in scholars working in those related fields to kind of opt in and then be able to share, through one kind of platform or website based on experts in Minnesota, their research, to help them find one another and share what research they're doing on water, for instance. So we're kind of experimenting with that a bit more. I will say we've also advised undergraduate students who are looking for undergraduate research opportunities to use that system to find faculty members that are doing research in that area, and then to reach out to them that way.
I love that you brought that up, because one of the things that's been in the back of my mind is kind of ongoing conversations about how to get undergraduates involved in humanities research, and when it's a solo project, it's kind of hard to figure out how you would fold a student into such a project. But I think some projects that are conceived from the beginning as collaborative can have a very specific kind of clear role for an undergraduate researcher. And I think the successful examples that I've seen are often DH projects or other projects that are just kind of inherently collaborative. So I think that's an added bonus to collaborative research, is finding new paths for undergrads to get involved as well. Let's see, let's do Mary's question. In terms of having space and expertise available at the library for encouraging collaboration, what have you found to be helpful, useful, necessary?
In terms of, yeah, when I think about space, there's, in some ways, it's just having, sometimes it's a surprisingly low tech thing. It's having space that is flexible, that has the whiteboard, things like that. I will say, when we've done kind of our research sprints and had these teams meeting in the same large room together, there's just that kind of energy from having people all together and being able to then potentially draw an expert into, we need somebody to say, here's what you could do with GIS, come and talk with us for a little bit and then go back to your other team. It's been nice to have that flexibility, but I do know what's coming to mind is that they have tried on the University of Minnesota campus, I think, having some spaces dedicated to research teams for a given semester or what have you. And I do not know if that's been as successful, or having that dedicated space, as much as having flexible space. It's really key. In terms of expertise, I think what has been called out is really helpful from different scholars, is just having that ability to find lots of different materials, having that guidance about how to organize those materials to be effective in your research, helping to make connections to technologists on campus to help with prototyping, speeding up data cleaning, things like that is really beneficial. The other thing that comes up quite frequently is the ability to bring up just different examples of very thought-provoking, exciting different projects that kind of get people thinking, talking, and imagining what they might be able to do themselves. That is something that I think librarians tend to do in teaching and in consultations, to give something that might be similar to what a person is talking about, that then prompts them to think about what is possible and to further refine their idea. I don't know what to call that expertise in some ways, other than that ability to translate across disciplines and across departments is a really key expertise that I think librarians take for granted.
Thank you. We just have a couple minutes left, but I really want to get to Lisa and Hollaback's question, which I think is a really good one. How does adjunctification and other labor conditions and crises in the humanities contribute to making collaboration more or less possible? Collaboration seems like a way to build partnerships across ranks potentially, but the issues of time and funding you've mentioned are even bigger barriers for non-tenure line researchers.
I would absolutely agree with that. When I think about who is more able in some ways in terms of just having the capacity, the job security in order to get involved in these projects, it has been full-time staff members sometimes, it has been full-time faculty. I find it tricky. We have in different times funded different internship opportunities, postdoc opportunities, and then what we found is that we feel stuck at the end of the year or 2 years and not having the funding to help them continue on in this phenomenal project that they've got going. That has been, I think, a barrier to some of those long-term collaborations that I don't know that we found the solution for, and feels like it's only going to be an ongoing problem as higher education budgets shrink. It's made me a little bit more tentative about relying on part-time staff members or going for like a 2-year term appointment, because I know how often we want to keep them, so then I feel kind of restricted to what we can do and supply for long-term funding to bring people into those projects. I don't know if you all have some thoughts on that too. It's just, I agree, that's a huge barrier and I don't have a great solution,
Yeah, I mean, I was actually kind of thinking about it in terms of is it a way for tenured or tenure track people to invite those adjuncts or other non-tenure track scholars into their project? So is it a way to kind of build on the resources that the tenure or tenure track person has as a way to kind of help support either colleagues in your department or colleagues that have been identified as having shared interests? So it might be a way for the people with the access to kind of open their work up to bringing on a number of collaborators from all of these different kind of levels of the sort of institutional hierarchy, so undergrad, graduate student, and staff, and also who I think often get left out of these discussions, as well as scholars in our departments who are teaching and interested in doing research, but don't have the same kind of time and resources. So it might actually be that someone with that time and resource availability could play a role in inviting that kind of scholar into their project. I mean, I think it would kind of depend on what the project was, but I think that could be kind of a self-instituted mandate for those who have the resources and the time to find ways that they could kind of fold a wider range of scholars into their work.
It also makes me think about that principle of mutual benefit, in a sense, finding ways that collaboration and partnership has a benefit to each of those collaboration partners. So what is then a benefit to the adjunct or term appointment staff member to work on that project? How will that benefit them in the future for their next role or the next institution with which they work? Does that expand your network in that regard? How is this a benefit to graduate students and undergraduates on their resumes as they go on the job market, for instance? So kind of going back to that, what's the benefit to all the parties can also, I think, be a good kind of foundational thing to discuss.
Yeah, I think these are important questions that aren't going to be totally wrapped up today. But I have so many notes from this conversation about things that I hope we can keep in mind as we implement new opportunities in the coming year and beyond. And so this was a really fruitful process, at least personally for me. And I really appreciate everyone being here and asking questions. And yeah, just as a quick note, I think that one of Puya's follow-up questions had to do with how to find experts. And in fact, the OSU experts directory is something that is up and running and is in the chat linked up above, but you can certainly, revisit it. Or go to the library, just do a Google search for experts directory. But this is something that we should all be contributing to that's new at OSU. And I think once it gets up and running, it will be a really valuable resource for everybody. Any concluding thoughts, either Sarah or Jenny?
I also want to say thank you again for having me. It's been great to meet you and to have this conversation.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for being here. And again, we will put this up on the website so that people can revisit it or share it with your colleagues who weren't able to be here today. And yeah, I think this is the first of many conversations kind of grappling with these issues. But we really appreciate everybody's time, including yours, Jenny. And have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.